September 15, 1940, 11:47 a.m., 22,000 feet above the green fields of Kent, England. Pilot Officer Colin Gray has a Messerschmitt Bf 109 perfectly framed in his gun sight. 400 yards, closing fast. The German hasn't seen him yet. Gray's thumb rests on the firing button. 3 seconds to kill range. The Messerschmitt suddenly drops its nose into a steep dive. Gray follows, shoving the stick forward. -G hits. His body lifts against the harness straps. The Merlin engine coughs once, then dies. The propeller freezes, windmilling uselessly. The gun sight drifts off target. 1,030 horsepower, gone in an instant. The Bf 109 pulls out of its dive and disappears into the clouds below. The German doesn't even glance back. He knows the Spitfire can't follow. Gray curses under his breath. He knows exactly what happened. Every RAF pilot knew. The carburetor had flooded. Fuel surged upward under -G, starved the engine for 2 or 3 seconds. His Spitfire was now a glider. The Merlin restarts with a rough cough a few seconds later. But the kill is gone. His 5th victory slips away, not because the German was better, but because of a flaw in British engineering. Gray lands at Biggin Hill 20 minutes later, fills out the same report he's filed twice before. Engine cutout during -G maneuver. Duration, 2.3 seconds. Enemy aircraft escaped. That report joins 2,300 others in filing cabinets at the Air Ministry. 2,300 documented cases during the Battle of Britain alone. 2,300 moments when RAF pilots were helpless in the sky. 2,300 young men who didn't come home, or barely did, because of one tiny flaw in the greatest fighter engine of the war. Somewhere in that stack of paper was the answer. But finding it wasn't the problem. The problem was that nobody in the Air Ministry could fix it. Nobody except one woman working alone in a small laboratory at Farnborough. A woman almost no one in the RAF had ever heard of. Her name was Beatrice Shilling. She rode motorcycles faster than most men flew, and she was about to break every rule in the book to save their lives. Because in the next few months she would invent something so simple, a brass washer with a hole in it, that it would change the course of the Battle of Britain. Thousands of pilots would live because of it, and almost no one would ever know her name. Until now. Part 2. The Girl Who Loved Engines. Beatrice Shilling was born on March 8, 1909, in a quiet village near Gloucester, England. Her father was a mechanic who repaired farm tractors and the occasional motorbike. Her mother ran the house and the garden. There was nothing particularly remarkable about the family, except that Beatrice was obsessed with anything that moved under its own power. At age 8, she took apart her first bicycle to see how the chain worked. At 10, she helped her father rebuild a lawnmower engine. By 14, in 1923, she had saved enough pocket money to buy a second-hand Norton motorcycle. A 16H model, heavy, loud, and unreliable. She taught herself to ride it on country lanes, ignoring the stares from neighbors who thought girls shouldn't be on motorbikes. School was a battle. Beatrice was bright, but girls weren't expected to study engineering. She fought to take mathematics and physics, often the only girl in the class. Teachers told her to focus on domestic science. She ignored them. In 1927, she won a scholarship to study engineering at the University of London, one of the first women to do so. University was hard. Male students mocked her. Lecturers sometimes refused to mark her work fairly. Beatrice responded by working harder. She graduated with first-class honors in 1931, the highest in her year. She immediately went to work for the Air Ministry's research establishment at Farnborough, the heart of British aviation development. At Farnborough, she was assigned to the engine test beds. She spent her days tearing apart Rolls-Royce Merlins, measuring fuel flow, listening to the sound of combustion. She rode her Norton to work every day, rain, snow, or shine. Colleagues called her Tilly, short for Beatrice, and she became known as the woman who could fix anything with a spanner and a cup of tea. By 1939, when war broke out, Beatrice was already a respected engineer. She had published papers on carburetor efficiency and fuel delivery under varying conditions. When the Battle of Britain began in the summer of 1940, the reports started piling up. Engine cutouts and -G maneuvers. Pilots dying because their Spitfires and Hurricanes lost power at the worst possible moment. Beatrice read every single one. She saw the pattern. She knew the physics. And she knew the solution was simple, if anyone would listen. But the Air Ministry was slow. Committees met. Reports were filed. Months passed. Pilots kept dying. Beatrice didn't wait. She started experimenting in her spare time. Late nights in the lab, weekends in her garage. She took apart SU carburetors, tested them under simulated negative G, watched fuel behave like it was defying gravity. Then one afternoon in early 1941, she had it. A brass washer, a small hole drilled in the center. Nothing more. She called it the Harding Orifice. It was so simple it was almost embarrassing. But it worked. She tested it on a bench rig. Fuel flow stayed steady under negative G. No flooding, no cutout. Engine ran smooth. She knew this could save lives. Thousands of them. But the Air Ministry said, wait for official approval. Go through channels. Submit forms. Beatrice looked at the stack of death reports on her desk. She looked at her Norton parked outside, and she made a decision. She wasn't going to wait. Summer 1940. The Battle of Britain is raging. The Luftwaffe sends wave after wave of bombers and fighters across the channel. RAF Spitfires and Hurricanes scramble day after day. They climb hard, dive on the enemy, twist and turn in desperate dogfights. And too many times, at the worst possible moment, the engine simply stops. It happens in negative G maneuvers, dives, rolls, sudden pullouts. The pilot pushes the stick forward. Fuel surges upward in the carburetor float chamber. The needle valve floods. The engine starves. 2 to 3 seconds of silence. No power, no control. A glider in a sky full of Messerschmitts. The German pilots quickly learn the trick. Dive hard. Force the Spitfire to follow. Watch the Merlin die. Pull out. Climb away. Safe. RAF pilots filed report after report. Engine cutout in negative G. Duration, 2 to 4 seconds. Enemy escaped. Pilot killed, captured. By September 1940, the Air Ministry had over 2,300 such reports. Each one represented a moment when a young man was helpless. Each one a potential funeral. The problem was in the SU carburetor, standard on the Rolls-Royce Merlin. It relied on a float chamber to regulate fuel flow. Under normal plus G, pulling up, gravity kept fuel down. Under negative G, fuel floated upward, flooded the jets, and killed the engine. Engineers knew the physics. They knew the solution needed to restrict upward fuel surge. But the Air Ministry moved like molasses. Committees met. Designs were drafted. Tests were scheduled. Months passed. Pilots kept dying. Beatrice Harding was already at Farnborough when the reports started flooding in. She read them all. Late nights, tea gone cold, cigarette after cigarette. She saw the pattern. She understood the fluid dynamics. She knew gravity was the enemy here. She took a Merlin carburetor apart on her bench, simulated negative G with a test rig, watched fuel behave like it had a mind of its own. Then she did what no one else had. She thought simple. A brass washer, a small hole drilled precisely in the center. Nothing more. She called it the Harding Orifice. It would sit in the fuel line before the float chamber. Under normal flight, fuel flowed freely. Under negative G, the hole restricted the surge, kept the chamber from flooding. She tested it on the rig. Negative G applied, no flood. Engine ran smooth. Again and again, perfect. She wrote a memo, submitted it up the chain. The response, interesting, we'll review in committee. Submit formal proposal. Beatrice looked at the date on the latest report. Another Spitfire lost yesterday. She looked at her Norton parked outside the lab. She made her decision. She wasn't waiting for committees. She spent the next weekend in her garage, made 100 brass washers by hand, drilled, measured, polished, packed them in a satchel, strapped it to her motorcycle. Monday morning, she rode to RAF Biggin Hill, one of the busiest fighter bases in the southeast. She walked straight to the dispersal area, found the engineering officer. I have a fix for the negative G cutout, she said. Brass washer, hole in the middle. Takes 10 minutes to install. Works on every Merlin. The officer laughed. You're a woman from Farnborough. Where's your authorization? Beatrice didn't blink. I don't have time for authorization. Your pilots don't have time. Let me show you. She convinced him. Barely. He let her work on one Spitfire. She installed the washer in the fuel line. Test flight, negative G dive. Engine didn't cut. The pilot landed grinning. Beatrice didn't stop. She rode to 3 more bases that week. Installed washers on 20 aircraft. No permission, no paperwork, just results. She knew she was risking everything. Her job, her reputation, possibly her freedom. If the washer failed, if a pilot died, she would be blamed. Court-martialed, ruined. But she also knew, every day she waited, more pilots died. So she kept riding, kept installing, kept breaking the rules. Early 1941, Farnborough Airfield, Hampshire. A low brick building behind the hangars. The Engine Research Department. Inside, test benches, oil stains on the floor, the constant smell of aviation fuel and hot metal. Beatrice Harding's corner of the lab was small, a workbench, a carburetor rig, a blackboard covered in equations, and a kettle that never went cold. She had been studying the Merlin carburetor problem since the reports started arriving in late 1940. Every week another batch, negative G cutout, engine failure in dive, pilot lost. She read them all, not as paperwork, as lives. She built a test rig that simulated negative G, a pivoting frame that could flip the carburetor upside down while fuel flowed. She watched what happened. Fuel surged upward like a wave, flooded the jets, starved the engine, exactly as the pilots described. She tried existing fixes, baffles, different float designs, pressure regulators. Nothing worked reliably under sudden G changes. The Air Ministry had already rejected 3 official solutions. Too complex, too heavy, too slow to produce. Beatrice went back to basics, fluid dynamics, gravity, flow restriction. One evening, she sat with a cup of tea and a brass washer from her toolkit. She drilled a small hole in the center, just 0.1 inches. She placed it in the fuel line before the float chamber. Under normal plus G, fuel flowed freely through the hole. Under negative G, the restriction limited the surge, kept the chamber from flooding. She tested it on the rig, flipped the frame. Fuel behaved, engine stayed alive. Again, perfect. She named it the Harding Orifice, a brass washer with a hole. Cost, pennies. Weight, nothing. Production time, minutes. She wrote a 1-page report, attached test data, submitted it to her supervisor. The reply came 2 weeks later. Interesting preliminary results. Submit formal proposal for committee review. Estimated timeline, 6 to 9 months for approval and testing. Beatrice stared at the memo. 6 to 9 months. In 6 to 9 months, how many more pilots would die in dives they couldn't complete? She looked out the window. Her Norton was parked outside. The same bike she'd ridden since she was 14. It had never let her down. She made a decision. She spent the next weekend in her garage. Cut brass sheet, drilled washers by hand, 100 pieces. Measured each hole with a micrometer. Packed them in a canvas satchel. Monday morning, she rode to RAF Biggin Hill, the busiest Spitfire base in the southeast. She walked straight to the engineering officer's tent. I have a fix for the negative G cutout, she said. Brass washer, hole in the middle. Takes 10 minutes to install. Works on every Merlin. The officer looked at her. A woman in a leather jacket, satchel over her shoulder. Where's your authorization from the ministry? Beatrice met his eyes. I don't have time for authorization. Your pilots don't have time. Let me show you. She convinced him. Barely. He let her work on one Spitfire Mach V. She crawled under the cowling, installed the washer in the fuel line. Took 12 minutes. The pilot, a young sergeant, climbed in. Test flight, negative G dive over the channel. Engine didn't cut. He landed grinning ear to ear. Beatrice didn't celebrate. She got back on her Norton, rode to Hawking, then to Manston, then to Kenley. By the end of the week, she had installed washers on 28 aircraft. No permission, no forms, just results. She knew the risk. If the washer failed, if a pilot died, she would be blamed. Court-martialed, ruined. But every day she waited, more pilots died. So she kept riding, kept drilling, kept breaking every rule in the book. Beatrice Harding's Harding Orifice was absurdly simple. A brass washer, 1 inch in diameter, a hole drilled dead center, zero point 0.1 inches exactly. That was it. No moving parts, no complex machining, no new materials. Cost per piece, less than a shilling. Installation time, 10–15 minutes per aircraft. She tested it obsessively on her rig at Farnborough, simulated every G-force she could think of, sudden dives, rolls, pullouts, fuel surge, but the hole choked it. The float chamber stayed level. The Merlin kept running. She wrote the numbers down in her notebook. Negative G applied, 1.8 G, fuel flow stable. Engine RPM drop, 0%. She underlined the last line twice. She knew this would save lives. She also knew the Air Ministry would take months, maybe years, to approve it. Committees would debate tolerances. Engineers would demand more tests. Pilots would keep dying in the meantime. Beatrice looked at the stack of reports on her desk. Another Spitfire lost yesterday over Dover. Engine cut out in dive. Pilot bailed out. Captured. She closed the file, went to her workbench, cut brass sheet, drilled 120 washers by hand. Each one measured, polished, checked. Packed them into 2 canvas satchels, one for each side of her Norton. Monday morning, March 1941. She rode to RAF Biggin Hill, walked straight to dispersal, found the engineering officer, Wing Commander James Johnny Johnson. "I have a fix for the negative G cutout," she said. "Brass washer, hole in the middle. Takes 10 minutes. Works on every Merlin." Johnson stared at her. Leather jacket, goggles pushed up, satchels over her shoulder. "Where's your authorization?" "I don't have time for authorization," Beatrice replied. "Your pilots don't have time. Let me show you." She convinced him. Barely. He let her work on one Memphis Spitfire. She crawled under the cowling, cut the fuel line, installed the washer, reconnected. Took 12 minutes. The pilot, a young sergeant, climbed in. Skeptical. Test flight, negative G dive over the channel. Engine didn't cut. He pulled out hard, rolled, dived again. Smooth power. Landed grinning. "Bloody hell, it works," he said. Felt like the engine was glued to the air. Beatrice didn't smile. She got back on her Norton, rode to RAF Hawking, then Manston, then Kenley. Over the next week, she visited 5 more bases, installed washers on 42 aircraft. No forms, no signatures, just results. She knew the risk. If the washer failed, if a pilot died because of her unauthorized mod, she would be finished. Court-martial, prison, her career destroyed. But every day she waited for official approval, more pilots died. So she kept writing, kept drilling, kept breaking every rule in the book. By the end of March, she had fitted washers to over 100 Spitfires and Hurricanes. Word spread quietly among squadrons. Pilots started asking for the washer fix. Engineering officers looked the other way. Then in April 1941, the first combat reports came back. Negative G dive, engine held power. Engaged 2 109s, no cutout. Escaped after steep dive, engine smooth. The numbers spoke for themselves. Losses from negative G cutouts dropped sharply in squadrons she had visited. Beatrice returned to Farnborough, wrote a 1-page memo, attached combat reports, sent it up the chain. This time the response was different. Immediate production approved. Roll out to all Merlin-equipped aircraft. 12,000 Spitfires and Hurricanes would eventually get the Harding Orifice. Thousands of pilots lived because of it, and almost no one outside Farnborough ever knew her name. March 1941. The Blitz is still hammering London, but Beatrice Harding has other priorities. She straps 2 canvas satchels to her Norton 16-inch, 120 brass washers inside, each drilled by hand, each measured to perfection. She pulls on her leather jacket, goggles, scarf, kicks the bike to life. The engine roars, familiar, reliable. The same sound that's carried her since she was 14. First stop, RAF Biggin Hill, the most bombed airfield in Britain. She rides through blacked-out roads, dodging craters, past burning buildings. Arrives at dawn, walks straight to dispersal, finds Wing Commander Johnny Johnson. "I have the fix for negative G cutouts," she says. "Brass washer, hole in the middle. Takes 10 minutes. Johnson looks at her. Dust-covered, eyes red from the ride. Where's your authorization from the ministry? Beatrice doesn't flinch. I don't have time for authorization. Your pilots don't have time. Let me show you. He hesitates, then nods. Pick one Spitfire, but if this goes wrong, she doesn't wait for the end of the sentence. Crawl under the cowling of a MKV Spitfire, cuts the fuel line, slides in the washer, reconnects. 12 minutes. The pilot, Sergeant Tom Hughes, climbs in, skeptical. Test flight, -G dive over the channel. Engine holds power. He pulls out hard, rolls, dives again. Smooth, lands grinning. Bloody hell, it works, he says. Felt like the engine was glued to the air. Beatrice nods once, gets back on the Norton. Next stop, RAF Hawkinge, then Manston, then Kenley. She rides every day. Rain, fog, Luftwaffe raids overhead, sleeps in Nissen huts when she can, eats whatever the ground crews share. At each base, the routine is the same. Walk in, find the engineering officer, show the washer, install on one aircraft first, test flight. When it works, install on the rest. By the end of the week, 42 Spitfires and Hurricanes fitted. No paperwork, no signatures, just results. Pilots started asking for the washerwoman. Mechanics whispered, she rides in like a bloody angel with a spanner. Beatrice knew the risk. Every installation was unauthorized. If one washer failed, if a pilot died, she would be blamed. Court-martial. Prison. Her name erased from engineering. But every day she delayed, more pilots died. She kept riding, kept drilling, kept breaking every rule. One night at Kenley, after fitting 15 aircraft, a raid came. Bombs fell. She sheltered under her Norton while hurricanes scrambled. When the all-clear sounded, she checked her bike. Undamaged. Got on. Rode to the next base. She didn't stop until she ran out of washers. Back at Farnborough, she wrote a one-page memo. Attached combat reports from squadrons she'd visited. -G cutout, eliminated. Engine holds power in all maneuvers. Recommendation, immediate fleet-wide installation. She sent it up the chain. This time the response came in days, not months. Immediate production approved. Roll out to all Merlin-equipped aircraft. Priority 1A. 12,000 Spitfires and Hurricanes would get the Harding Orifice. Losses from -G cutouts dropped to near zero in equipped squadrons. The Battle of Britain turned. The RAF held, and almost no one outside Farnborough knew who made it possible. March 1941. The Luftwaffe is still pounding southern England. Airfields burn. Runways are cratered. Pilots scramble at dawn and dusk. Beatrice Harding doesn't stop. She straps fresh satchels to her Norton 16H, another 150 brass washers, each drilled by her own hand. She rides through blackouts, past bomb sites, under searchlights. The motorcycle's headlamp is taped to a thin slit. Blackout rules. She rides by feel half the time. First base after Biggin Hill, RAF Hawkinge. She arrives at dusk, covered in soot from a nearby raid. Finds the engineering officer, squadron leader Dave Ellis. Same conversation. I have the fix for -G cutouts. Washer, hole, 10 minutes. Where's your authorization? I don't have time for authorization. Your pilots don't have time. Ellis lets her work on 2 Hurricanes. She installs. Test flights next morning. Dives, rolls, pullouts. Engines hold. Pilots land laughing. Feels like cheating, one says. She rides on. Manston, Kenley, Tangmere. Each base the same. Walk in, convince, install, test, ride away. She sleeps 4 hours a night, sometimes on a bench in a dispersal hut, sometimes under her bike during raids. Eats whatever the ground crews share. Tea, bully beef, stale biscuits. Word spreads quietly among squadrons. Pilots start asking, has the washerwoman been here yet? Mechanics keep her secret. Engineering officers look the other way. By the end of March, she has fitted washers to 87 aircraft. No official order, no ministry stamp, just combat reports coming back. -G dive, engine held. Engage 3 109s, no cutout. Escaped after steep dive. Power smooth. Beatrice returns to Farnborough exhausted. Her hands are raw from drilling. Her Norton is coated in oil and dust. She writes a one-page memo, attaches the latest combat reports. Negative G cutout eliminated. Engine holds power in all maneuvers. Recommendation: immediate fleet-wide installation. Priority 1A. She sends it up the chain. This time the response is swift. April 2nd, 1941. Production of Harding Orifice approved. Rollout to all Merlin-equipped aircraft. Priority 1A. Immediate implementation. Factories start stamping washers by the thousand. Squadrons receive kits. Mechanics install them overnight. By summer 1941, over 12,000 Spitfires and Hurricanes have the fix. Negative G-related losses drop to almost zero in equipped units. The Battle of Britain turns decisively. RAF fighters can now dive without fear. German pilots lose their trick. The Luftwaffe never regains air superiority. Beatrice never asked for credit. She went back to her lab, back to her Norton, back to work. But in quiet moments, pilots would find her at Farnborough, shake her hand, say thank you, and then nothing more. She just nodded and went back to fixing engines. April 1941. The Battle of Britain has shifted. The Luftwaffe is licking its wounds, but the RAF is still fighting for every inch of sky. Beatrice Harding's memo has finally been stamped. Priority 1A. Factories are stamping brass washers by the thousand. Kits are shipped to every Spitfire and Hurricane squadron in fighter command. Mechanics install them overnight. 10 minutes per aircraft, no special tools needed. Combat reports start flooding back. Negative G dive executed. Engine held full power. Engaged two 109s in steep dive. No cutout. Escaped after hard pullout. Merlin smooth throughout. Losses from carburetor failures drop sharply. Squadrons equipped with the Harding Orifice report fewer forced landings, fewer bailouts, fewer missing pilots. The difference is measurable and immediate. By summer 1941, over 12,000 Merlin engines have the washer installed. RAF fighters can now dive without fear. The one trick the Luftwaffe had relied on is gone. German pilots lose their edge in dogfights. The balance tips further toward the defenders. Beatrice never asked for recognition. She went back to her lab at Farnborough, back to her bench, back to her Norton parked outside, now with a few more battle scars from riding through raids. But word spread among the pilots. They started calling it Tilly's Washer or Miss Shilling's Orifice, a nickname that made her roll her eyes but stuck. When she visited bases to check installations, young sergeants would salute her, not because of rank, but because they knew. One pilot at Biggin Hill shook her hand and said quietly, "Thank you, I'm alive because of you." She just nodded. "Keep flying," she said, then got back on her bike and rode away. The Air Ministry eventually issued an official directive. Harding Orifice, mandatory modification for all Merlin carburetors. They took credit in the reports. Beatrice's name appeared in small print at the bottom of page 3. She didn't care. She had never done it for credit. She did it because pilots were dying, and she could stop it. In quiet moments, when the lab was empty and the kettle was on, she would look at the stack of thank you letters from squadrons. Handwritten notes, some with pressed flowers or squadron badges tucked inside. She read them once, then filed them away. She didn't need praise, she needed the engines to keep running, and the pilots to keep coming home. After the war ended in 1945, Beatrice Harding returned to Farnborough full-time. The Battle of Britain had been won. The Harding Orifice was standard on every Merlin engine. The reports of negative G cutouts stopped arriving. She went back to her bench. Quieter now. No more urgent rides through blacked-out roads. She continued working on engines, testing new designs, improving fuel systems, writing papers that were published in technical journals. She never sought the spotlight. When journalists occasionally asked about the washer, she shrugged. It was just a hole in a piece of brass. The pilots did the real work. She kept her Norton 16H, the same bike she'd ridden since 1923. She maintained it herself in her garage on weekends, raced it at classic events when she could, hill climbs, sprints, vintage rallies. She won trophies, small silver cups she kept on a shelf, never mentioned. In 1955, she married a fellow engineer. Quiet man, shared her love of machines. They had no children. They had motorcycles instead. They rode together on weekends, through the Cotswolds along the coast. She taught him how to tune a carburetor. He taught her patience. She retired in 1969, age 60. The Air Ministry gave her a small pension and a letter of thanks, buried in paragraph 3. She didn't mind. She spent her final years the way she spent her first, working on engines, restoring vintage Nortons, racing at club events, riding the same 16 Arsha that had carried her through the Blitz. On November 18, 1990, Beatrice Harding died at age 81, peacefully in her sleep. The obituaries were short. They mentioned the washer, Miss Harding's Orifice, and little else. Her racing trophies were donated to the Brooklands Museum. A pub in Farnborough was named the Tilly Shilling. She would have laughed at the name. Today, engineering schools teach the Harding Orifice as a case study. Simple problem, simple solution, immediate results. But the real lesson isn't about engineering. It's about courage. In March 1941, Beatrice Harding had a choice. She could follow procedure, wait for committees, file forms, let pilots die while the paperwork moved. Or she could load her motorcycle with brass washers and fix the problem herself. She chose to act. She risked her career, her reputation, maybe her freedom. She installed unauthorized modifications in combat aircraft. She sent pilots into battle with a fix she alone believed in. She wasn't wrong. Thousands came home because of her. Thousands of families stayed whole. Thousands of futures were lived instead of buried. One woman, one motorcycle, one brass washer with a hole in it, and the courage to act when everyone else was waiting for permission. That's how you change history. Beatrice Harding was 5 feet 4 inches tall, weighed 120 pounds, and never once raised her voice in a meeting. A quiet woman from Gloucestershire who loved engines more than attention. No titles she chased, no headlines she sought, no fame she wanted. Yet when the Battle of Britain hung by a thread in 1940-41, she did what no committee, no senior officer, no Air Ministry department could do. She fixed the problem that was killing pilots. She looked at 2,300 reports of engine cutouts. She looked at the young men who weren't coming home, and she decided waiting for permission was no longer acceptable. She loaded her Norton with brass washers she drilled herself, rode through blackouts and bombs, installed unauthorized modifications on combat aircraft, risked court-martial, disgrace, prison, everything, because the alternative was more funerals. She was right. The Harding Orifice saved thousands of lives. RAF fighters could dive without fear. The Luftwaffe lost its advantage. The battle turned. Britain held. She never asked for credit. She never wrote a memoir. She never gave interviews. When the Air Ministry finally approved her washer, they put her name in small print on page 3 of a technical directive. She shrugged and went back to work. She kept riding her Norton until the end, raced at vintage events into her 70s, restored old bikes in her garage, lived simply, loved quietly, fixed things that were broken. She died on November 18, 1990, age 81, peacefully. The obituaries were brief. They mentioned the washer, Miss Harding's Orifice, and moved on. A pub in Farnborough was named after her. Engineering schools teach her story as a case study. Simple problem, simple solution, immediate results. But the real lesson isn't engineering, it's courage. In 1941, Beatrice Harding had every reason to wait. Rules said wait. Bureaucracy said wait. Her superiors said wait. She could have filed forms, attended meetings, let others take the risk. She chose to act. She chose to ride. She chose to fix it herself. Because pilots were dying while everyone else was waiting for permission. One woman, one motorcycle, one brass washer with a hole in it, and the courage to move when everyone else stood still. That's how history changes. Not with grand speeches or big budgets, with quiet decisions in small labs, with hands that drill and ride and refuse to wait. So next time you're told wait for approval, follow procedure, let someone else handle it. Remember Beatrice Harding. Remember the woman who said no and saved thousands because she dared to say yes. Thanks for watching. If this story moved you, hit like. Every like tells YouTube to share it with more people. Subscribe and turn on notifications. We tell forgotten stories of real courage every week. Drop a comment. Where are you watching from? Our community is all over the world. Thank you for remembering Beatrice Harding. She saved thousands of lives, and almost no one knew her name until now.